This has been a rather remarkable week. It's one of those almost providential assignments, I guess, to be here with you in this place talking about these subjects on a night following the last two I've spent. On Tuesday night, many of you noticed, I had this assignment to speak for an alternative point of view to what is currently the policy of this country. And then yesterday, as things happened, this truly historic moment, not just in our state, but possibly beyond our state, the vote that was cast in the House of Representatives. And I just want to spend a minute or two thinking about what that means and about the critical need for people like you to be willing to be a little less humble and a little less modest. It may be obvious to everybody in this room, but it is a little less obvious than it ought to be, and that it once was to a lot of our fellow citizens, that nothing works in America unless the private sector and the private economy is strong. Nothing works. We will not be the leader of the free world, for instance. We are not the leader of the free world now, really, because people studied the Federalist Papers, admired our Constitution, and decided that just the brilliance of these ideas was something they wanted to follow. Oh, that happened. People like the philosophy of a nation of and by and for the people. But if it hadn't worked the way it did, if it hadn't created unbelievable bounty and plenty and success for millions and millions of people who started with nothing, if it hadn't been that, it wouldn't have been the beacon that it's always been. And we will not remain the leader. People will not follow a pauper. And it all, of course, depends on people like you and the enterprises that free men and women start. And this is just a little less obvious than it once was, and we now have voices in the country, including some in high office, often the highest office, who just don't seem to get that, and in fact are willing to disparage and denigrate people in business and so forth, people who pursue the profits without which there won't be anything else. Pretty basic rule of life. You didn't think it'd be too hard for people to understand. Nobody makes a profit, nobody's got a job. Nobody makes a profit, no money for the nonprofits we all love to support. You say, why should that even have to be stated? Well, it's been said sometimes the first duty of a citizen is the restatement of the obvious. And I think we're at one of those moments. Our own president, his wife, have gone to college commencements and said to our young people, to some of our best young people, whatever you do, don't go into business or one of those dreaded corporations. Go into nonprofit work or government. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I've always believed, and certainly I've done some tours in public service, and I encourage young people to do it all the time. But we can't all do it. There won't be any money to support any of it. I want to just tell you a little story or two about the last couple days and about how people who ought to know better can become tongue-tied about these very basic truths and about the not just the appropriateness of business and the free enterprise system, but of its nobility, of its centrality to making opportunity possible for everybody else, and most particularly for those who start at the bottom. So I'm prepared. I write this little talk for the other night, and they told me I could say what I wanted to say, but I had two customers, so to speak, the leader of the Senate, the Speaker of the House. I sent it down to their offices so they could have a look. They didn't wrestle with me about much, but one of their offices came back, not once but twice, challenging a line that I had written in there. It's something I've said many other times. What I often like to say is, and it's true, that when people from business in Indiana come see me about something, we talk about their agenda, their issue, or whatever it is, because of the way people in business tend to be, almost invariably, before they leave, they'll say, hey, listen, is there anything we can do? Is there something we can do for Indiana? I always say the same thing. Yeah, make money. I want you to make money. I want you to be good at what you do and succeed. If you do, one day you'll hire somebody else, give somebody a chance they don't have today. And if you do make money, you'll support the arts and philanthropies for the poor and all those things that we need so in the fabric of our state. So they came back and they said, oh, you better not say that. You know, the other side will jump all over that. And I said, I'm sorry, but I say it, and I say it that way for effect, to get people's attention. And this is the central argument. If we're afraid to defend a free enterprise system, and if we're afraid to protest when government attempts to smother and strangle and control and guide and shape and exploit it, then the second biggest problem is that individual businesses here might suffer. The biggest problem is this nation will suffer, and poor people in this nation will suffer, because a vibrant, growing system in which men and women of enterprise, through their innovation and ingenuity, their hard work, their persistence, through all the inevitable setbacks and heartaches and failures, they're the best hope of young people and low-income people in this country. And that's been the magic of America, and it always must be. So I told him, no, I said, I hear you, but I just disagree. This is the argument. It's right near the heart of the argument, and with respect, I'm going to go ahead and say it just that way. There was a second line in there they wanted to argue about. I made a little play on words, and I said, Steve Jobs, the late founder of Apple, I said, he had such a fitting name. I said, he created more of them than all those stimulus dollars the president borrowed and blew. So this one young man in the one office comes back and goes, oh, well, that was a good line, but it won't work anymore. And then I wrote back why. And he said, well, the New York Times had a story Sunday that a lot of Apple's jobs were offshore. I mean, 43,000 in the U.S., but they had a whole bunch offshore. That's where they make, because that's where it's most efficient to make their iPhones or something, their iPads. I said, well, I'm not changing that either. I said, first of all, believe it or not everybody in America sits around poring over the New York Times or takes their guidance there. Maybe down where you work, sir, but not in Warsaw or Winona Lakes. I said, but no, there's something else. Listen, I meant that. That is factually right. It's, by the way, because, it's not the 43,000. That's the inner circle of a concentric circle of incredible opportunity that the genius of that man and his company has created. I said, did you think about all their suppliers? Did you think about all their distributors? Did you think about all their retailers and all the people that work for them? Did you think about the fact that unlike those stimulus jobs, government job came one year, gone the next, those jobs, multiply that by the 30-some years Apple's been in business. Did you think about all the jobs that all their technologies enabled as they were used by businesses in completely different lines of work, probably including orthopedics? Did you think about any of that? That's the system we have. That's why people like Jobs, being an extreme example, but each of you is the best hope of low-income people in this country and the best hope of the generations now young and yet to be. And we just cannot be timid, and we cannot be tongue-tied, and we cannot be too humble about it, especially at a time when it's under some assault. So that was Tuesday night. And then last night, along about 5 o'clock, a miracle happened, really, or let's just say an historic moment happened. The Taft-Hartley Act was passed in 1948, and the states of this country rather quickly sorted themselves out. About 20 of them took advantage of the opportunity to make dues paying voluntary, and the others didn't. And over the intervening years, only a couple states have joined that list. No northern state ever has. No industrial state ever has. So I guarantee you no northern industrial state ever has. Until now. Now, I just have to tell you that you should, if you believe that that was a right step and a right policy, then you really should appreciate the bravery, not just of tenacious Rebecca, but everybody else that voted as they did. They took a lot of heat, and it was pretty lonely. I tried many times to get the folks in organized business. I said, you know, we know we're not expecting you to do what the other side does, spend jillions of dollars, hire buses, print T-shirts, print up placards, and pay people to come down here. But can't you show up once? Could there be not one, how about one rally? The public opinion polls are absolutely consistent. Hoosiers by 2-1 believe this is a right and fair and good thing to do. The numbers are overwhelmingly on that side. Fewer than 9% of Hoosiers belong to a labor union, and some of them don't agree with the policy of forced dues. Now, they have every right, of course, to express their point of view and do everything they did, but noise doesn't equal numbers. And it would have been extremely useful for the true numbers to make themselves more visible. But it didn't happen. I know that the legislators have these weekend meetings. Only in a few cases did the supporters manage to show up, but every one of them, they were faced with very aggressive, to use a gentle word, people in opposition. And yet they hung in there and they did the right thing anyway. And they did an historic thing. But I just am here to say that in the years or two ahead, it will be very, very useful if people who believe in the promise of this country and understand that it depends on the success of a vibrant, ever-growing private sector full of innovators like Warsaw is famous for, and full of people who are willing to take that risk or loan that risky, make that risky loan, or otherwise participate in the dynamic process of creating a growing economy that spreads opportunity for all. Unless those folks are willing to be a little less humble about what they've done, because you ought to be really proud, and a little more vocal about why it's important not just to them, but to everybody else around them,